He was standing at the foot of the bed, holding a duffel bag in one hand, his boots still damp from the rain. I was barely curled under a fleece blanket that smelled like cedar and dust, my clothes scattered on the floor beside a soaked backpack. For a second, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the soft creak of the floorboard under his weight and the ticking from the old clock above the fireplace. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember blinking. Just the look in his eyes, steady, unreadable, and the way his jaw tightened like he was trying very hard not to say what he was thinking. It's funny how a single moment can feel endless, how shame can arrive before the consequences do, how your mind races to build excuses when your body can't move. If I had spoken first, maybe things would have gone differently. But I didn't. And so, he did. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "And why are you in my cabin?" Now, before you judge me, before you assume this is one of those stories, I need you to understand something. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I didn't know this place wasn't empty. And I sure as hell didn't expect the man who owned it to walk in while I was naked, half asleep, and too sick to stand. But since we're here, I might as well start from the beginning. Let me tell you what really happened the week I disappeared. The week that changed everything. My name's Claire Mercer. I'm 27, still renting a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in a town so small the gas station closes at 8. I work tech support for WLKD Public Radio, the kind of place held together by duct tape, burnt coffee, and one aging signal tower that groans every time the wind shifts. It's not glamorous, but it pays enough to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked with frozen meals. They hired me because I knew how to wire field transmitters and didn't mind long drives in bad weather. That, and I didn't ask for much. Most days I fix static in local broadcasts, replace fried cables, or reboot computers that haven't been touched since 2003. But once in a while, they send me out on site to troubleshoot our backup repeaters planted in the middle of nowhere. Which brings me to that Friday. Forecast said sleet. My boss, Carl, said it'd pass. "Just a quick drop-off," he promised. "Bring the backup antenna to the ridge cabin. Leave it inside. You'll be back by nightfall." I should have known better. The ridge cabin was an old property once owned by a silent investor who funded half the station's expansion. Carl said no one had used it in years. Said it belonged to some retired guy with too much land and not enough time. So I packed the gear, filled the tank, and started the drive 2 hours up icy roads, through thinning trees and fog that never quite cleared. I didn't plan to stay. But the weather had other ideas. By the time I reached the cabin, snow had started to fall sideways. I couldn't get a signal. Couldn't see the road behind me. Couldn't even feel my fingers by the time I carried the crate to the porch. The keys were taped under the window. The lock clicked open easy. And just like that, I stepped inside a place I didn't belong, with no idea that I'd already crossed a line I couldn't undo. The tires crunched over packed snow as I pulled up the last half-mile of the road, if you could even call it that. More like 2 faded ruts winding through pine and rock, half hidden under white. I had to kill the engine just to hear if the wind had changed. It hadn't, still howling like it had a grudge. The cabin sat tucked behind a split-rail fence, buried halfway up the walls in drifts. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been there for a long time. When I opened the door, the air inside was colder than outside. It hit like a wall. No heat, no light except for the weak spill from my flashlight. Dust floated in the beam like ash, but it was dry. And in that moment, that was enough. I set the crate down in the front room, wiped snow off my jacket, and told myself I'd be back on the road in 20 minutes. That was before I saw the storm roll in. It came fast, like it had been waiting. By the time I looked out the window again, everything beyond the trees had vanished in white. I tried to radio back to town, but the signal was pure static. I checked my phone. No bars. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the wall, doing math in my head. Distance to town. Fuel. Temperature drop. Risk of sliding off a cliff in the dark. I'd spent enough winters in Montana to know when to stop pretending. I wasn't getting back that night. The fireplace looked like it hadn't been used in years, but the woodpile outside was dry and split. Someone had stocked it before winter, whoever that retired guy was. So I built a fire, hung my coat near it, stripped off the damp layers and laid them out to dry. Then I stood in front of the flames, half naked and steaming, trying to ignore the way my legs shook, not just from cold, but something else. Something I couldn't name yet. By the time the fire crackled steady, I was too tired to think, too alone to feel anything but numb. I found a blanket on the couch, thick and coarse, like it had belonged to someone who valued warmth over style. I wrapped it around myself and climbed into the loft. I told myself it was just for a few hours. I had no idea who the cabin really belonged to, or what would happen when he came back. The fire took longer than I expected. The logs were dry but stubborn, and my hands shook as I struck the matches, one after another, until the paper caught. Smoke curled up the chimney, thin at first, then thicker, warmer. I sat back on the rug, knees hugged to my chest, watching the flame build from a flicker to something alive. It was the first time I'd felt heat in hours. My clothes were soaked through, jeans stiff with melted snow, sleeves clinging to my skin. Every movement felt like peeling off armor. By the time I stripped down to just skin, my body stung from the temperature shift. I stood close to the fire, trying to dry out. Not just the fabric, but the ache underneath. The fatigue that had settled somewhere deeper than muscle. It wasn't just the drive. It was everything. The nights I stayed late rewiring busted transmitters. The days no one remembered to say thank you. The way silence sometimes echoed louder than the machines. I wrapped a blanket around me, thick, coarse, scratchy, in a way that reminded me of childhood camping trips. And I climbed into the loft, hoping to shut the world out, just for a while. The mattress was firm, but clean. The kind of clean that comes from not being used. No sheets, just another blanket folded at the foot. I curled into myself, hair still damp, the firelight flickering up the wooden walls like ghosts too tired to haunt. My eyes stung from the heat. Or maybe just from the quiet. It's strange how fast sleep finds you when you're not trying. 1 minute, I was blinking slowly, listening to the logs crack. The next, I was gone. I didn't hear the wind shift, didn't hear the engine outside, didn't hear the key turn in the lock, or the sound of boots stepping into the room I thought was mine, just for one night. I didn't know I'd be woken not by morning light, but by the voice of a stranger. And not just any stranger. The man who owned the cabin, and everything I had just taken for granted. The first thing I felt was the heat. Not the soft warmth of the fire, but that sharp, instinctive kind. The kind that tells you something's wrong before your eyes even open. I blinked. Light leaked through the gaps in the wooden slats above the loft. The room was quiet. too quiet and cold, despite the fire still glowing in the hearth. Then I felt it. Someone was there. I turned my head just slightly, enough to see the shape at the bottom of the ladder. A man. Tall. Still. Not moving. One boot still damp with snow, the other planted like he hadn't decided whether to leave or stay. His face wasn't angry, just unreadable, like he was trying to make sense of what he saw, and what he saw was me, wrapped in his blanket, lying in his bed, bare shoulders visible, my arm clutching the fabric tight against my chest. Everything inside me went rigid. My throat dried up before I could speak. He didn't say anything at first, just kept staring. Then, calmly, almost too calmly, he asked, "Who are you?" I tried to sit up, but my muscles felt like they'd turned to water. The blanket shifted. I pulled it tighter. "My name's Claire," I said, voice barely a whisper. "I work for WLKD. There was a storm. I thought this place was empty. I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" I stopped, because I didn't even know what I was trying to say. His eyes moved across the room, took in the drying clothes, the backpack, the fire. Then he said, with zero emotion, "You need to get dressed." I nodded, already scrambling, blanket wrapped like a shield. My face burned hotter than the fire. He turned around before I moved. I don't know if it was out of respect or discomfort. But in that moment, the silence between us was louder than anything either of us could have said. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay in the loft, wrapped tight in that rough old blanket, listening to the floor creak below. He moved around like someone who knew every board, every draft in the wall, every loose nail in the staircase. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he come back up. At some point, I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I remember was the smell of coffee. I came down slow, dressed in yesterday's half-dry clothes. My shirt was wrinkled and stiff in the arms, my jeans cold at the waistband. He was already at the table. A black mug sat in front of him. Steam rose from it, curling toward the ceiling. He didn't look up when I entered, just nodded slightly like I was expected, but not exactly welcome. On the counter was a folded flannel shirt. He said nothing, just motioned to it with 2 fingers. I picked it up. It was worn, soft, probably older than me, smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. "Thanks," I murmured. Still no answer. He poured a second mug and slid it across the table without asking how I took it. I sat down across from him. The table between us was thick, handmade, probably built before either of us were born. Every scratch had a story, but neither of us told one. He sipped his coffee. I sipped mine. The silence stretched, thick like fog. I wanted to explain myself again, to justify staying the night, to tell him I hadn't meant to invade his space, that I didn't even know his name. But something about the way he sat there, calm, observant, silent, made all of it feel useless. He wasn't looking for an apology. He wasn't even looking at me, not directly. He was looking through me, not with judgment, with calculation, like someone measuring distance, not intent. After a while, he stood up, took both mugs, rinsed them without a word. Then, finally, he said, "Road's still shut. You'll have to wait." I nodded, and that was that. Breakfast was over. But whatever had started between us, it wasn't. Not yet. The roads cleared by early afternoon. At least, that's what the county website said. I checked it 3 times before I dared to speak. "I'll head out," I told him, standing near the front door, my backpack already slung over one shoulder. He just gave a short nod, as if he'd expected it. No attempt to stop me. No polite goodbye. Just that same quiet stillness he'd carried since the moment we met. I stepped outside into brittle, cold air. The sun was out now, but weak, more for show than warmth. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I made my way back to the car. No words had passed between us since that one sentence about the road. Not even a name. He hadn't asked for mine. I hadn't dared ask for his. But his presence clung to me like wood smoke, quiet, lingering, and hard to wash off. I started the engine, let it idle. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel, though I wasn't cold anymore. As the tires rolled back onto the main road, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The cabin stood still behind the trees, half in shadow, half in sunlight. No movement at the windows, no figure at the door. Just silence. But my head was anything but quiet. Something about him stayed with me. Not his face exactly, or his words, but the weight of the moment we shared without meaning to. The way he hadn't flinched when he found me in his bed. The way he hadn't yelled, hadn't demanded, hadn't made assumptions. He'd just observed and let me leave. You'd think I'd feel relief. But what I felt was disoriented, like I'd walked into someone else's life for a night and come back with something I didn't know how to name. It took exactly 6 days for the ripple to reach me. I was back at the station, soldering a broken jack on one of our remote headsets, when Carl stuck his head into the tech room. "Claire," he said, too casually, "you didn't happen to make any friends on that ridge trip, did you?" I looked up. "Not unless trees count." He smirked, handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a donation receipt, $25,000, from a private trust. No name, just a memo line. To support rural broadcasting and the women who keep it alive. I froze. Carl was still watching me, his tone light but pointed. "You sure you didn't charm some lonely old donor while you were out there?" I laughed it off. "You're giving me too much credit." But inside, something twisted. Because I knew. I didn't have proof. No signature, no note. But I knew it had come from him. And that meant he hadn't forgotten. The whisper started that afternoon. By Tuesday, I'd heard it 3 different ways. She must have done more than fix cables out there. Guess it pays to spend the night in the right bed. Funny how the budget's been tight for months, and now suddenly she's our golden girl. I didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't give them anything to feed on. But the silence around me changed. Subtle shifts in hallway glances. Murmurs that stopped the moment I walked in. It didn't matter what I'd done or not done. It only mattered what they thought I might have. The money spoke louder than my truth ever could. You don't always notice the shift right away. It starts small, just a half-second delay in someone saying good morning, or the way a coworker no longer meets your eyes when passing in the hallway. But eventually, it grows teeth. By the end of that week, everything at the station felt a little colder. I wasn't imagining it. The way Megan from admin used to wave from her desk, now she just nodded, tight-lipped. The 3 guys from production, who used to joke around by the vending machine, suddenly got real quiet whenever I walked in. Carl didn't say anything directly, but I caught him watching me more, like he was trying to figure out what kind of deal I'd made, and with who. I kept my head down, fixed what needed fixing, said thank you when I had to, smiled when I could. but it didn't change anything. The hallway silence said more than their words ever could. And when they did speak, it was the kind of casual cruelty that comes wrapped in politeness. "You headed back to the ridge anytime soon, Claire? Oh, hey, nice flannel. Looks expensive. Man, some people have all the luck." I wanted to scream or laugh or quit. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I stayed quiet. Because once people think they know something about you, especially something unconfirmed, unsaid, they hold on to it like it's truth. And if you deny it too hard, that only convinces them more. In their eyes, I wasn't just Claire anymore. I was Claire with the check. Claire who must have done something. Claire who maybe slept her way into a budget surplus. They didn't know the truth. Worse, they didn't want to. And the more I tried to act normal, the more abnormal I seemed. The Whisper Network didn't need facts. It just needed an audience. And I had already given it one without even meaning to. It showed up on a Tuesday, folded in half, taped to my locker. At first, I thought it was a maintenance request. Sometimes people left notes when equipment went down, but the handwriting was too neat, too deliberate. I opened it. Virginity lost, integrity too. No name, no signature, just 7 words, scrawled in black ink with surgical precision. I stared at it for a long time, long enough for someone to walk past, glance, and keep walking. No one said anything, but they didn't have to. I folded the paper and slipped it into my bag like it was something contagious. My fingers itched for hours afterward, like just touching it made it true. That night, I couldn't focus on anything. Dinner sat cold on the counter. My phone buzzed twice. I didn't answer. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall. It wasn't about the words. Not really. It was the fact that someone had written them. That someone in that building, someone I worked with, someone who smiled at me yesterday, had taken the time to twist a rumor into a message. And it landed. Because suddenly I couldn't walk down the hallway without wondering who had done it. Who had said the first thing? Who had passed it along? Who had watched me read that note and felt proud? Reputation is a fragile thing. It doesn't crack cleanly. It frays, slowly, quietly. At the edges first. And then all at once. I used to feel invisible in that building. Now I felt exposed. Like every eye carried the same question. Like no matter what I did, what I hadn't done, I'd already been written into a story I didn't author. And it was being read without me. I wrote it on a Wednesday. Simple. 12-point font. No formatting. Just 1 paragraph and my name. I didn't include why. Not because I didn't have reasons. But because none of them would have mattered. Not to them. What was I supposed to write? I'm leaving because someone taped a personal attack to my locker and you all acted like it didn't happen. Because I'm tired of pretending that silence is the same as peace? No, I just wrote, "Effective immediately. I resign from my position at WLKD. Thank you for the opportunity." That was it. I printed it, folded it once, slipped it into Carl's mailbox on my way out. I didn't clear my desk. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't even look back. The hallway was too quiet, like everyone knew what I was doing, but no one dared meet my eyes. And honestly, I didn't want them to. There's a strange kind of dignity in walking away without a scene. It's not brave. It's not noble. It's just necessary. I got in my car, turned the key, sat there for a full minute, letting the engine hum beneath me. Then I drove. No plan. No idea where I'd land next. All I knew was I couldn't stay in a place where every good morning felt like a dare, where every closed door might have had my name behind it, where people decided who I was based on a night they weren't even there for. I didn't lose anything at that cabin, but I did lose something after. And by the time I handed in that resignation letter, I was no longer interested in defending what everyone else had already thrown away. I didn't tell anyone where I went. I rented a weekly room above a diner 2 towns over, the kind of place where nobody asks questions as long as you pay in cash. The walls were thin, the shower whined, the heater clicked like it was dying in its sleep, but at least no one knew my name. For a while, that was enough. I spent my days walking aimlessly, watching strangers live lives I wasn't part of. Parents juggling toddlers, teenagers in fast food uniforms, couples arguing in parking lots. None of them knew me. None of them cared. And I'd never realized how much I needed that, because the truth is, people don't judge you for what you do. They judge you for what they think you've done. That's the real weight. Not your choices, but their stories about your choices. Not your silence, but the spaces they fill it with. I hadn't slept with him, hadn't touched him, had barely spoken 10 full sentences in his direction, but the minute the donation showed up, the minute I was seen leaving that cabin, the verdict was already written. No defense, no appeal, no chance. Because if there's one thing people love more than facts, it's fantasy. Especially the kind where a woman's body becomes currency, where her worth is measured by proximity to a man with power, where mystery becomes guilt, and guilt becomes gospel. So I stopped trying to correct the narrative. Let them think what they wanted. Let them tell the version that made them feel clever. Let them feel like they knew something no one else did. I had nothing left to prove, except maybe to myself. And that was going to take more than disappearing. I started going by my middle name, June. No one questioned it. At Rusty's, names didn't matter, only if you showed up on time and poured without wasting liquor. Rusty was a man of few words. He hired me because I didn't talk much, and because I could handle Friday nights without crying in the walk-in fridge. The bar sat at the edge of a highway no one remembered building, halfway between 2 towns too small to matter. Locals came for cheap beer, truckers stopped for hot wings and silence. It was perfect. No office politics, no break room rumors, no donations taped to lockers, just a sticky floor, 2 busted neon signs, and the same 10 songs looping on the jukebox. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I kept my hair tied back, wore plain clothes, didn't ask questions and didn't answer many either. My past stayed zipped inside an old duffel bag under my bed. People assumed what they wanted. Some thought I was a college dropout. Others guessed divorcee. One guy asked if I was on the run from the IRS. I let them guess. Because none of it mattered. Not here. I wasn't Claire from the radio station. Wasn't the girl who'd slept in someone else's cabin. Wasn't the subject of half-spoken accusations and whispered jokes. I was just the bartender who made a solid old-fashioned and never forgot your regular. There was a strange comfort in it, in being reduced to routine. I thought, maybe I could stay that way. invisible by choice this time, safe in the margins. And for a while, I did. But the thing about starting over is, you don't always get to decide when the past knocks again. Sometimes, it doesn't knock. Sometimes, it just walks in and orders tea. It was a Wednesday. Quiet. Cold. The kind of night where you could hear the hum of the beer fridge louder than the jukebox. I was wiping down the counter, thinking about nothing, when the door opened. A man stepped in. Alone. Wool coat, black gloves, calm, clean stride. The kind that didn't belong here. It took less than a second to recognize him, longer to accept that it was real. Benjamin Hartley, standing under the flickering, open sign like he'd just stepped out of memory and into my life. He didn't scan the room, didn't hesitate, just walked straight to the bar and sat down across from me like it was any other night. I froze. I didn't speak first. He did. "Do you have tea?" he asked. His voice hadn't changed. Still low, still steady, still carrying weight without volume. I blinked, then nodded. "Black or green?" "Black, plain." I moved automatically. Heat water, drop in the bag, no lemon, no sugar. My hands shook, just enough to spill a few drops onto the saucer. He didn't seem to notice. When I placed the cup in front of him, he looked at me. Really looked. Not in surprise, not in judgment. Just recognition. Like, "So, this is where you ran to." I tried to match that calm, but I could feel my pulse in my throat. He didn't bring up the cabin, didn't mention the donation, didn't ask why I disappeared. He just took a sip of tea, then set the cup down with both hands, like he needed a moment to decide if he'd stay. Neither of us spoke. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the door. Inside, the silence between us stretched, thicker than when we'd first met. Heavier now because of everything we weren't saying. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "You look different." I answered without thinking. "So do you." But the truth was, he didn't. Not really. That calm was still there. That gaze that felt like it could peel you apart without ever raising its voice. And I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. I hadn't forgotten him. Not even close. He didn't stay long. No long conversation. No mention of the past. Just a few quiet sips of tea. His gaze drifting now and then to the window, like he was watching something only he could see. I busied myself with wiping down an already clean section of the bar, pretending not to watch him from the corner of my eye. When he stood, I thought he might finally say something, anything. But all he said was, "Thank you." Then he turned and walked out. Just like that. No dramatic pause. No second glance. Just the sound of the door closing behind him and the bell giving a lazy, half-hearted ring. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I saw the cup, still on the counter, and underneath it, barely visible, was a white card. No envelope, no handwriting on the front. Just a clean edge peeking out like it had been left with care. I slid it out, turned it over. 5 words. "Cabin still open, no reason needed." My fingers went still. No name, no contact, just that message. I read it again, and again. It said everything without saying anything at all. It didn't ask me to come. Didn't demand forgiveness. Didn't explain why he'd found me, or how. Just an open door. No pressure, no expectations, just space. Like he somehow knew I needed that more than anything else. I tucked the card into my apron pocket. Didn't show it to anyone. Didn't mention it later. But I didn't throw it away either. Because even if I never used it, part of me already had. I didn't go. Not that night. Not the next one either. I told myself I had work. Told myself I was too tired or too busy or too far removed from that version of me who once slept on his mattress and woke up in his life. But none of those reasons were real. The truth was, I was afraid. Not of him. Of what it would mean to go back. Of what I'd find waiting. Of what it would say about me if I still wanted to. Because the cabin hadn't disappeared. Not in my mind. It lived there, quietly. Like a photograph half tucked in a drawer. Like a smell you can't name but recognize instantly when it returns. I'd see pine needles crushed into snow and think of the path behind the cabin. Hear firewood crack and feel the weight of that blanket again. Taste black tea and remember the silence between two people who barely knew each other but still understood more than they should have. I carried it all, even when I pretended I didn't. The note stayed in my wallet, folded once, soft at the edges now. Some nights, after closing, I'd pull it out just to look at it. Cabin's still open. No reason needed. It didn't ask. It invited. And that was worse, because invitation means choice, and choice means risk. Going back could mean nothing, or everything, or something in between that hurt more than either. I kept thinking, what if I show up, and he isn't there? Then again, what if he is? The question never left. And over time I realized something. It wasn't about the cabin. It was about whether I was ready to stop hiding. Spring came late that year. The kind of late where snow stuck to the edges of the highway even into April, like winter hadn't quite finished making its point. But eventually, the ice gave up. The trees softened. The mornings held just enough warmth to make you believe in change again. I waited until the mud dried. Until the road to the ridge was more dirt than slush. Until I could look at that note one last time and not feel the sting of shame. Then, one Sunday, I packed a small bag and drove north. I didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a message, didn't even know what I expected to find. The road was quieter than I remembered. Less ominous, somehow. Maybe it was the sunlight. Maybe it was me. When the cabin came into view, I slowed down. It looked the same, weathered, still, like it had been waiting without needing to. I parked at the edge of the trees, heart thudding harder than it should have. My hands hesitated on the keys, then let go. There were no footsteps outside, no movement in the window. No smoke from the chimney, just the wind, brushing through the pine like it was trying not to wake anything. I walked up to the door, knocked once, waited. No answer. I tried the handle. It opened. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered, the same coarse blanket folded neatly on the couch. The same faint smell of cedar and old coffee. A cup on the shelf where I'd left one behind. And then I heard it. Boots on wood. A slow step behind me. I turned. He was there. Not surprised. Not smiling. Just watching me like he knew I'd come eventually. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. Because sometimes showing up is the only answer that matters. He didn't ask why I was there. Didn't question how long I planned to stay, or what made me come back after all this time. He just stepped aside, let me in fully, and closed the door behind us like nothing between us had ever been left unfinished. I set my bag down in the corner without asking. He didn't flinch. For a moment, we just stood there. Two people breathing the same air again, this time not by accident, but by choice. The silence wasn't awkward. It was known, familiar, like a song you used to hum without realizing. Benjamin walked to the small kitchen and poured 2 mugs of water from the kettle already heating on the stove. No words, no need for them. I sat at the table, running my fingertips along the edge of the wood. Same scratches, same old knots in the grain. It was all still here, untouched by whatever the world had said about us. He placed the mug in front of me, same as that morning long ago. Only this time he sat too. He sipped first. I followed. The tea was plain, dark, a little bitter, just like before. But nothing else felt the same, because now we weren't strangers playing roles. We were 2 people who had already been to the edge of misunderstanding, and still came back. His eyes met mine over the rim of the mug, and there it was again. That look, not searching, not questioning, just steady, like he was still watching who I was becoming, not who I had been. I didn't ask him why he found me. He didn't ask why I disappeared. Maybe that was the gift, that we didn't have to retell what already lived between us. Didn't have to explain the ache or the silence or the sharp, quiet damage other people had tried to write onto us. We just were. And for the first time in months, I let myself believe that was enough. He cooked. Nothing fancy. Just skillet potatoes, onions, eggs, and a slice of smoked trout he pulled from a small freezer chest near the wall. I offered to help. He shook his head once gentle, not dismissive, and handed me a fork instead. We ate by the window. No candles, no music. Just the creak of the wood stove and the steady click of silverware on ceramic. Outside, the trees swayed slow. Inside, everything felt still. He didn't ask where I'd been, didn't mention the note he'd left under the teacup, didn't try to name what this was. And I didn't ask what he'd hoped for when he wrote those 5 words. We spoke, eventually, about small things. The weather, a fox he'd seen last week near the tree line, how the generator still rattled like a loose tooth when the temperature dipped too low. Nothing that meant anything, and yet it meant everything. Because for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't trying to defend my existence. I wasn't proving I deserved to be there. I wasn't shrinking under the weight of someone else's opinion. I was just eating dinner with someone who didn't look at me like a rumor, who didn't need a story to justify my presence, who simply passed the salt when I reached for it. I caught him looking at me once halfway through the meal, not staring, not studying, just seeing. And I realized that might be the rarest thing of all, to be seen without being sized up, to be known not by your past, but by your presence. We didn't finish the food, but we stayed at the table, long after the plates had cooled, long after the silence became the conversation. And not once did I feel like I had to explain why I'd come. We didn't move from the table for a long time. The plates sat untouched. The fire burned low. The light from the single lamp above us turned everything soft and gold. I wrapped my hands around the empty mug, feeling its warmth long after the tea was gone. He stood up first, carried the dishes to the sink. rinsed them like it was just another night in just another cabin. No grand gesture, no heavy pause. Then he turned to me, and for a moment I thought he was going to ask why I came, what I wanted, what this meant. But he didn't. He just said quietly, "You can stay." Not a plea, not a question, not a bargain, just a fact, offered plainly, like a spare key left on the counter. "If you want to," he added after a beat. "You don't owe me a reason." I looked at him, at the same eyes that had once found me in his bed, the same man who hadn't asked then and wasn't asking now, just offering space and trust. I didn't say yes, didn't nod, didn't move, but something inside me settled, like a door had been opened, not pushed, not pulled, just left ajar. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to walk away to protect myself. For the first time, I realized maybe staying wasn't weakness. Maybe it was choice, and maybe that made all the difference. It happened just when I started to believe I'd outrun it. We'd gone into town for supplies. Nothing dramatic. Just groceries, new batteries, a replacement fuse for the generator. I remember thinking how normal it felt. Quiet, unnoticed. Or so I thought. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. An old number. One I hadn't saved but immediately recognized. A producer from the radio station. I didn't answer, but the message came anyway, in the form of a link. No caption, no explanation, just the damage. A photo, grainy, zoomed in, taken from inside a car. Me. Stepping out of Benjamin's truck in front of the hardware store, hair tied up, flannel shirt, same boots I'd worn last winter, same man beside me. The caption read, "Guess she's back where it all started." I didn't scroll down. I didn't need to. I could already hear the voices. So it wasn't a one-time thing. I knew she was playing the long game. Imagine getting rewarded twice for the same mistake. The photo wasn't proof of anything, but it didn't have to be, because in the court of public opinion, images speak louder than silence. And silence? Silence becomes confession. I left the cabin that afternoon. Didn't tell Benjamin. Didn't leave a note. Just packed the bare minimum and drove until the trees thinned and the weight in my chest settled into something numb. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down, I knew what was happening. The past doesn't knock twice. It barges in, uninvited, shameless, and loud. And no matter how far you run, if someone wants to drag your name back through the dirt, they will. I landed in a different town. Didn't matter where. A place with different signs, different faces, different streets I hadn't walked before. But within a week, the same old feeling crept in. At first it was quiet. The woman at the grocery store smiled a little too tightly. A barista spelled my name wrong 3 times in a row, then stopped saying it altogether. And someone I don't know who slipped a newspaper clipping under my motel room door. It wasn't even new, just a reprint of the photo. Same blurry outline of me. Same truck. Same headline that made it sound like I'd done something dirty and gotten away with it. That was the trick, wasn't it? It was never about facts, just framing. Even in this new place, where no one knew me, shame had a way of arriving early, like it had booked a room before I did. I'd walk down the street and feel eyes I couldn't prove. Hear snickers I might have imagined. But the heat on the back of my neck was always real. It didn't matter that they didn't know the truth, because I did. And somehow that made it worse. I thought a change in geography might mean a change in story. But shame doesn't respect borders. It travels light. It only needs memory to survive. And mine was generous. I didn't check my phone anymore, didn't open news sites, didn't reach out to anyone. Not from the station, not from the bar, not even him. Because what could I say? I left again, not because of you, but because the world keeps dressing me in guilt I never agreed to wear. Somehow that sounded too tired, too old, too familiar. So I stayed quiet. New zip code, same silence, same shame. He found me again. This time, I wasn't surprised. I was sitting outside a cheap diner, paper cup of coffee in hand, when his truck pulled into the lot. Same model, same quiet engine, same man who never needed an invitation. He didn't say hello, just sat down across from me, rested something flat on the table, a printout of the photo. The same one. Familiar now, in the way a wound becomes part of your skin. He slid it toward me, careful, like it might still be fragile. Then he looked me in the eye and asked, calmly, "Do you want me to speak up?" No hint of pride, no sense of obligation, just a question. Like everything else he ever gave me? Offered, not pushed. I looked at the photo, then at him, and I knew what he meant. He could go public, clear the story, tell the truth, or at least his version of it. He had the name, the silence people would listen to, the power to tilt the narrative in my favor. But I shook my head. No. He didn't ask why. He just studied me for a moment, as if measuring whether my choice came from strength or exhaustion. The truth was, both. Because I was tired of fighting to be believed, tired of proving I didn't earn what I never asked for, tired of pretending someone else's approval would make me whole again. I didn't want a press statement, didn't want his protection delivered like a favor. I just wanted space to live without being defined by what people whispered. He nodded once, not in defeat, but in understanding. Then he folded the photo in half, tucked it into his coat, and said nothing more. And that silence, that quiet agreement, felt more like love than anything anyone had ever said to me. We didn't talk for a while after that, not because there was tension, but because something had settled, like the question had been asked and answered. I stayed in that town, not because it welcomed me, but because I didn't need it to. I found work-odd jobs here and there, nights behind counters, mornings cleaning rentals. Nothing permanent, but enough to pay for a bed and breakfast I could call mine for now. The rumors followed, as they always did, but this time I didn't leave. Because for the first time in years I realized running never saved me. It just bought time. Time to hope people forgot. Time to hope I would. But memory doesn't fade when you bury it. It ferments. One night, Benjamin showed up again. We walked by the river. The air was cold enough to see our breath. At one point, he asked gently, "Are you okay staying here?" And without thinking, I said, "I want to stay, on my own. Not because someone stood up for me, not because someone shielded me. I just want to stay because I'm done running." He didn't press, didn't ask what staying looked like, didn't offer to build walls around me, just walked beside me in silence. And that was enough, because this time, the choice was mine. Not forced, not reactive, not desperate. Mine. I wasn't here to rewrite the past. I was here to outgrow it. And staying, really staying, was how that started. It came on a Thursday. He knocked on the side door of the cafe I'd been helping out at, didn't make a scene, just waited by the alley entrance until my shift ended. We walked a few blocks, no destination in mind. Then, as we passed a half-renovated library, he said, "I need someone to help manage some things." I raised an eyebrow. He clarified. "Local projects, infrastructure, small grants, land zoning, hiring volunteers. It's expanding. Too much for me to handle alone." I kept walking. He kept pace. "I don't want a secretary," he added. "I want someone who understands small systems, and how fragile they are." I didn't answer right away, because it didn't feel like a favor. It felt like trust. He wasn't offering me rescue. He was offering me work. Real, steady, rooted work, where my voice mattered and my hands built something that stayed. It took me a full block to respond. "You're sure?" I asked. He nodded. "You already know how to survive broken things. That's exactly the kind of person I want fixing this place." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It felt spacious, like a door opening to a room I didn't know I wanted to enter until now. And maybe that was the first time I understood. Healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like function, like waking up with purpose, like being asked, not saved. I didn't give him an answer then, but we both knew I would. Not because I owed him anything, but because, for once, someone wasn't handing me a shield. They were handing me tools. I didn't say yes right away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something in me hesitated. Not because of him. Not because of the work. Because of me. What did I know about managing a community project? About zoning permits, budgets, hiring people with real degrees? I wasn't qualified. No certifications. No titles. Just years of surviving small, invisible fires, quiet humiliations no one puts on a resume. I sat in my room that night with the window cracked open, letting in spring air and self-doubt. There was a time I would have jumped at the offer just to feel wanted. Another time I would have rejected it out of pride. Now I just stared at the ceiling and wondered if wanting more meant I thought I deserved it. And I wasn't sure I did. The world had told me I was a whisper, not a voice, a rumor, not a name, a shadow in someone else's story. Who was I to step into something that mattered? I kept circling the same question, what if I try and fail? But another voice, quieter, followed right behind it. What if I try and don't? What if I built something better, not just for others, but for myself? What if I stopped being a footnote? What if surviving wasn't the whole story? Benjamin hadn't asked for credentials. He'd asked for presence, and presence was the one thing I had earned the hard way. Maybe the truth I carried wasn't loud or polished, but it was mine. And maybe that was enough to begin. I met him the next morning by the trailhead. No ceremony, just a quiet stretch of land behind the town hall, where survey flags marked future benches and garden beds. He was already there, gloved hands gripping a shovel. When he saw me, he didn't smile, just waited. I stood a few feet away, unsure of how to begin. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my throat for days. Why me? Not bitter, not doubtful, just honest. He leaned the shovel against a post and looked at me like he had that first night in the cabin steady, no flinch. Then he said, "Because you don't pretend." That was it. 4 words. No flattery, no strategy, just a truth simple enough to sting. "Everyone else edits themselves," he added after a pause. "Even when they think they're being brave, you didn't." I thought back to the version of me he first met, cold, wet, half asleep, wrapped in someone else's blanket and silence. And later, the me who didn't beg to be believed, who didn't defend her choices, who left rather than perform righteousness. It wasn't strength. Not really. It was just the one thing I had left. Truth, with nothing added. He saw that. And somehow, he didn't see it as a flaw. He saw it as foundation. I nodded once. That was all I could manage. But inside, something clicked into place. Not ego, not pride, just recognition. I wasn't being offered a gift. I was being invited into something that needed someone like me, unvarnished, unafraid to be seen, even if it meant being misunderstood. I stepped forward. Not because I felt ready, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn the right to begin. I said yes. Not all at once. Not with a dramatic pause or some speech about second chances. Just a quiet, solid yes delivered over the hood of his truck, with dirt on my boots and sun in my eyes. He didn't celebrate. Didn't offer a handshake or a pat on the back. He simply nodded, once, then handed me a clipboard. "We start Monday." And that was it. No contract, no conditions, just responsibility given without hesitation, as if I already belonged. It felt strange, stepping into something bigger than myself. I wasn't used to rooms where my presence was assumed. Wasn't used to being asked to decide, not react. But there I was, walking the boundary lines of a new community project, learning names, balancing budgets, asking questions that actually led to answers. People looked at me differently now. Not because they knew my story, most didn't, but because I showed up. Early. Focused. Curious. Willing to learn what I didn't know and own what I did. And with each task completed, something inside me grew. Not pride, exactly. Confidence. Not in the past, not in whether I'd been misunderstood or misjudged, but in the present, in my capacity to build rather than outrun, to participate rather than prove. I wasn't there for him. Not for the man who offered the job. Not for the man who once stood at the foot of a bed I was too tired to climb out of. I was there for me. Because finally, I believed I could hold something steady. Not just survive it. And maybe that belief was the most radical thing I'd ever done. It's been a year. 12 months since I first said yes. 365 days since I stopped running and picked up the clipboard that changed everything. I've done more than I thought I could. Organized 6 grant cycles. Rebuilt a community garden that now feeds 30 families. Led meetings with people twice my age and never once apologized for being there. The tremble I used to carry in my voice? Gone. The habit of shrinking when someone questioned me? Gone, too. I speak plainly now, with weight, not volume, with clarity, not defense. I know the zoning codes. I know which supplier overcharges for lumber. I know how to negotiate a maintenance contract without being talked over. But more than that, I know myself. I know what I'm capable of when I stop bracing for impact. When I stop waiting for someone to question why I belong. I didn't become someone new. I just stopped hiding the person I already was. That's the part no one tells you. The version of you you're running toward. She's been there the whole time. Waiting. Patient. Capable. I still think about that cabin sometimes. But it's not the fire or the silence or even the man who first saw me without asking anything. It's the version of me who got up the next day. Put her clothes back on. Walked into the snow. And kept going, even when she didn't know where. She didn't disappear. She just grew. Now, when I see her in the mirror, shoulders square, eyes steady, I don't feel shame. I feel recognition. The rumors are gone now, not because someone corrected them, not because the truth was finally published, but because they stopped mattering. People stopped whispering, stopped guessing, not because they knew what really happened, but because they saw what I did next, and what I kept doing, week after week, month after month. I became the woman who stayed late to finish grant reports, the one who knew which kids needed coats before winter, the one who remembered birthdays and zoning laws in the same breath. I didn't explain myself, didn't offer up the past like a cautionary tale. I just kept showing up. Quiet. Consistent. Real. And slowly, something shifted. The same eyes that once narrowed now nod. The same people who once tiptoed around me now seek my advice. It's not fame. It's not forgiveness. It's something smaller, steadier. It's respect. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a kind of stillness when I enter a room. A knowing that I belong. That I earned this place not by shouting, not by defending, but by living in a way that made their stories irrelevant. Now, when people look at me, they don't see a headline. They see a person who stayed. And sometimes that's all it takes. You stay long enough, you build something solid enough, you become undeniable. I don't flinch anymore. Not at eyes, not at whispers, not even at memory. Stillness, I've learned, isn't something you find. It's something you earn. One truth at a time. We sat on the cabin porch again. Same view, same wind in the trees. But nothing about us was the same. I had come back, not running this time, not hiding, just visiting. He poured tea like he always did. Still didn't ask unnecessary questions. Still didn't fill silence just to fill it. We talked about work, the latest permit battle, the kids who painted murals on the new town library walls. Then, as the light shifted and the sun dipped lower, he said, "You don't owe me anything. You know that, right?" I looked at him, not startled, not confused, just waiting. He didn't smile, didn't look away. "But if there comes a day," he said, voice steady, "when you're not just surviving, not just building something for yourself, but ready to build with someone." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. No ring, no question, no deadline. Just space, offered freely. A future, not forced, not wrapped in expectation, just waiting if I wanted it. I sat with it, let it settle, not as pressure, but as permission. Because love, I'd learned, wasn't always fireworks or vows. Sometimes it was this: someone who never tried to fix you, only waited until you were ready to stand beside them on your own terms. I reached for the teacup, took a slow sip. Then I nodded. Not a yes, not a promise. Just, I heard you. And maybe, one day. For now, it was enough to know the door was open, and this time, I wouldn't be walking through it to escape anything, only to choose. There's this image that stays with me. It's not the photo that leaked, not the cabin on a snowy morning, not even Benjamin standing in the doorway, watching me sleep. It's something quieter, less dramatic, more honest. It's me, half undressed, exhausted, unfiltered, laid bare, not just in body, but in fear, in confusion, in silence. And being seen, really seen, not for beauty, not for tragedy, just for being human. At the time, I thought it was a kind of shame. The lowest point. The moment I lost control of the story. But now, I understand it differently. That was the beginning. Because that's when the pretending stopped. When the defenses cracked. When someone looked at me, not to judge, not to rescue, but simply to witness. And in being witnessed, I didn't disappear. I emerged. I didn't find clarity in speeches or explanations. I didn't reclaim my life by rewriting the headlines. I did it by choosing, again and again, to stay, to show up, to try, to let people look and not flinch. That's what healing became for me. Not erasing the moment I was most exposed, but learning to stand inside it without apology. That night in the cabin wasn't the end of something. It was the start. The point wasn't the place. It never was. The point was that I stopped hiding. And somehow, in being seen at my most uncertain, most raw, I saw myself too, and I never looked away again.